My company went bankrupt because of a lawsuit I never saw coming. I stood on my son's porch, the man I raised single-handedly, asking for a place to sleep for just 2 weeks. He looked at me, handed me $200 and said, "Dad, you should find somewhere else to live." So I left. I thought my life was over. But that very night, I received a call from a stranger, a billionaire, who told me the lawsuit was no accident. Before I tell you how I took everything back, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The rain was cold. It was not just chilly. It was that bone-deep freeze that settles into your joints when you are 71 years old and have nowhere left to go. I stood there shivering in a suit that used to be expensive, but was now just wet wool smelling of damp defeat. My hands gripped the handles of 2 rolling suitcases. That was it. That was the sum total of my life. 40 years of blood, sweat, and diesel fumes. 40 years of building Hart Logistics from a single beat-up van into a fleet that crossed state lines. And now it all fit into 2 suitcases and a garment bag slung over my shoulder. I looked up at the house. It was a sprawling colonial in the best part of Atlanta. I knew the brickwork well. I knew the custom mahogany front door well. I wrote the check for the down payment 5 years ago. I remembered signing that check, feeling a swell of pride that I could give my son Byron the start in life I never had. I started in a shack with a tin roof. He started in a mansion. That was the dream, wasn't it? To make sure the next generation stood on your shoulders. But as the rain dripped from the brim of my hat and ran down my neck, I realized I wasn't standing on a foundation anymore. I was standing in the mud. I raised my hand to knock. It trembled. Not from the cold, but from the shame. A man like me, a man who used to command boardrooms and negotiate with unions, shouldn't be knocking on a door asking for charity. I hesitated. My pride screamed at me to turn around to sleep on a park bench before I begged. But then a gust of wind nearly knocked me over, and I remembered the reality. The bank had seized the penthouse. The cars were gone. My accounts were frozen pending the investigation. I had $60 in my pocket. I knocked. 3 hard raps against the wood. I waited. I could see the warm glow of lights inside. I could hear faint music, something jazz, something sophisticated. It sounded like peace. It sounded like home. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung open. Byron stood there. My boy. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a glass of red wine. He looked at me, and for a split second I saw the toddler I used to carry on my shoulders at the rail yard. Then I saw the man he had become. His eyes didn't light up. They didn't fill with concern. They darted left and right, checking the long driveway, checking if the neighbors were watching the soaked old man on his doorstep. He did not step aside. He did not say, "Come in. Dad, get out of the rain." He just stood there blocking the warmth. "Dad," he said. The words sounded heavy, like an accusation. "What are you doing here? It is late." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Byron," I said, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. "They came today. The marshals. They put the padlock on the apartment. I have nowhere to go, son. I just need a place for a week or 2. Just until I sort out the legal appeal. Just until I can access my pension." Byron shifted his weight. He took a sip of his wine, looking over my shoulder at the dark street. I saw him hesitate. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He knew he owed me everything. He knew this house was mine in everything but name. But then she appeared. Courtney, my daughter-in-law. She stepped up behind him, wrapping her manicured arm around his waist, her sharp chin resting on his shoulder. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first truck. She looked at me not with pity, but with the same look one gives a stray dog that has wandered onto a manicured lawn, a mixture of disgust and annoyance. "Oh, Walter," she said. Her voice was light, airy, and completely devoid of warmth. "You are dripping everywhere." "I am sorry, Courtney," I said, trying to stand a little taller. "It is pouring out here." "Byron, honey," she whispered. But it was a stage whisper meant for me to hear. "The Persian rug in the foyer. We just had it cleaned. If he comes in the smell of wet wool and, well, the smell of the street will settle into the fibers." I felt my face heat up. The smell of the street. I was wearing a suit I bought for a shareholders' meeting. I was Walter Hart. I was not a vagrant. "Courtney," I said, looking her in the eye, "I am your father-in-law. I am not asking to sleep on your rug. I am asking for the guest room, the one in the basement. I won't be in your way." She tightened her grip on Byron. She didn't look at me anymore. She looked at her husband, her eyes narrowing. Byron, we talked about this. We need our space. You know how stressed I have been with the charity gala planning? Having house guests right now, it is just not feasible. It is too much pressure on our marriage. Byron looked at her, then he looked at me. I saw the moment he made his choice. I saw the moment the spine I thought I had grown in him dissolved. Dad, he said, and his voice was firmer now, bolstered by her cruelty. Courtney is right. It is a bad time. We have guests coming this weekend. The house is full. The house is full, I repeated. It is 6,000 square feet, Byron. There are 5 bedrooms. Just you and Courtney live here. It is not about the square footage, Dad, he snapped, his guilt turning into anger. It is about the dynamic. We are trying to build a life here. We cannot just pause everything because you lost control of your business. I felt like he had slapped me. Lost control. I was sued for a safety violation I never committed. A truck accident I had nothing to do with. I fought it, but the evidence was overwhelming, almost fabricated. So that is it, I said, the water dripping from my nose. You are turning me away. Byron sighed. He set his wine glass down on the entry table. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a sleek leather thing. He opened it. I watched his fingers that had never known a day of hard labor because I made sure they didn't have to fumble with the bills. He pulled out a handful of cash. 20s, a 10, some ones. He crumpled them up in his fist and thrust them toward me. Here, he said, there is about $200 here. I looked at the money. I didn't move my hand to take it. Take it, Dad, he insisted, shoving it toward my chest. Look, there are motels on the south side, or the shelter on 5th Street. They are decent. It is just for a few days, right? You said you would figure it out. You are a survivor, Dad. You always figure it out. The south side, the place I had worked 40 years to get us out of. He was sending me back there, and he was paying me $200 to disappear. Courtney peeked over his shoulder again. You should hurry, Walter, she said. The forecast says the storm is going to get worse. And really, Byron closed the door. You are letting the air conditioning out. I looked at the money in his hand. Then I looked at his face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the collar and shake him and remind him who paid for the roof over his head, who paid for the college degree hanging in his office, who paid for the wedding where he vowed to protect his family. But I didn't. I am 71 years old. I don't scream. I don't beg. I reached out, but I didn't take the money. I swatted his hand away. The bills fluttered down, landing in the puddles on the porch. The face of Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill soaked up the muddy water. I don't want your money, Byron, I said. My voice was low, barely audible over the rain, but I saw him flinch. Keep it. You might need it when your conscience wakes up. I turned around. I grabbed the handles of my suitcases. My knuckles were white. Dad, wait! Byron called out, but he didn't step onto the porch. He didn't step into the rain. I didn't look back. I began to walk down the long, winding driveway. The wheels of my suitcases rattled on the wet pavement, a lonely, hollow sound. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of the door closing, then the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. They locked it. They locked me out. I walked until the lights of the mansion faded into the distance. I walked until my shoes were soaked through and my socks squished with every step. I was alone. I was bankrupt. My family had discarded me like a broken piece of furniture. I finally stopped at a bus shelter just to get out of the downpour. I sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping through my wet trousers. I put my head in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt truly broken. I had faced strikes, recessions, and lawsuits, but I had never faced this, the total abandonment by my own blood. I sat there for an hour watching the cars splash by, wondering if this was how it ended. Walter Hart dying of pneumonia on a bus bench. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't check it. Who would be calling me? The creditors, the lawyers. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked from when I dropped it leaving the courthouse. It was an unknown number, no caller ID. I stared at it. It rang and rang. Finally, out of sheer habit, I swiped answer. Hello, I rasped. Walter Hart, a voice asked. It was deep, gravelly, and commanding. It wasn't a voice I recognized, yet it sounded familiar. Who is this? I asked. I don't have any money if you are a collector. I am not a collector, the voice said. I am an investor, and I know you are not at your son's house anymore. I stiffened. How do you know that? Because I have been watching you, Walter. I have been watching you since the lawsuit started. I know you didn't cut those brakes. I know you were set up. I stood up, looking around the dark street. Who are you? My name is Cornelius Graves, the man said. I froze. Cornelius Graves, the real estate tycoon, the billionaire who owned half the skyline of the city, a man I had competed against for land contracts 20 years ago, a man known for being ruthless. Why are you calling me Graves? I asked. We aren't friends. No, we are not, Graves said. But we share a common enemy. You just don't know it yet. Look to your left. I turned my head. A black Rolls-Royce was pulling up to the curb, its windows tinted so dark they looked like ink. The back door opened. Get in, Walter Graves said through the phone. You are wet, you are angry, and you have nothing left to lose. I have a proposition for you. And trust me, it is worth a lot more than the $200 your son just threw at you. I looked at the car. Then I looked back in the direction of my son's house. I had nothing. No home, no family, no dignity. I hung up the phone. I grabbed my suitcases, and I stepped into the car. I didn't know it then, but as that heavy door closed, shutting out the rain, I wasn't just stepping into a warm car. I was stepping into a war. And Walter Hart was done being a victim. The neon sign of the Blue Star Motel buzzed with a dying, erratic rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. I stood at the reception counter, separated from the clerk by a thick sheet of bulletproof glass that was smeared with grease and years of despair. The clerk, a man with yellowed eyes and a shirt that had not seen a washing machine in weeks, looked at me with open suspicion. I placed my wet, crumpled bills on the counter, one by one. $45. It was a fortune to me now. Yesterday, $45 was what I tipped the valet who parked my car. Today, it was the price of survival. Room 7. The clerk grunted, sliding a key under the slot. Don't lose it. We don't have spares. Checkout is at 10. No guests. No noise. I took the key. The metal was cold and sticky. I dragged my suitcases across the cracked linoleum floor, the wheels catching on every imperfection. I walked out into the courtyard where the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke, exhaust fumes, and looming violence. Sirens wailed in the distance, a constant lullaby for the residents of this forgotten corner of the city. I found room 7. The door looked like it had been kicked in more than once. I pushed it open and the smell hit me. Mildew. Bleach trying to cover up something worse. Desperation. I locked the door behind me and engaged the deadbolt. Then I wedged a chair under the handle. It was an old habit from my early days trucking through dangerous territories, a habit I thought I had left behind decades ago. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It sagged under my weight, the springs groaning in protest. I was Walter Hart. I built skyscrapers of logistics. I employed thousands. And here I was guarding a room that cost less than a bottle of wine, terrified that someone would break in and steal the nothing I had left. My stomach growled a sharp, twisting pain. I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the remaining change from the $200 Byron had thrown at me. I had spent most of it on the room and the cab ride here. I had $3.50 left. I walked to the vending machine in the hallway. I stared at the selection. A bag of chips. A package of peanut butter crackers. A cup of instant noodles. I chose the noodles. They were warm. They felt like a meal. I stood there waiting for the coil to turn, praying it wouldn't get stuck. When the cup dropped, I felt a wave of relief so profound it humiliated me. I returned to my room, used the hot water from the bathroom tap, and ate in silence. The plastic fork scraped against the styrofoam. Every bite tasted like ash. This was rock bottom. This was the precise coordinate of dignity's death. I laid back on the bed, shivering. The dampness from the rain had seeped into my bones. My head felt heavy hot. A fever was setting in. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, memory came. It came with the clarity of a nightmare. I was back in the boardroom. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the faces of the people I trusted. Simon Fletcher sat across from me. He was my lawyer. He was the man I paid to protect my legacy. He wore a suit that cost $5,000 and a smile that cost my soul. Byron was there too, sitting at the far end of the table looking down at his hands. Walter Simon had said, his voice smooth and reasonable. The evidence regarding the brake failure is circumstantial, but the media is out for blood. If we go to trial, they will destroy the company's reputation. They will drag Byron into this. As the head of maintenance oversight, he is technically liable. I remembered looking at Byron. He looked so young, so fragile. He wasn't built for prison. He wasn't built for scandal. "What are you suggesting, Simon?" I had asked. "Take the plea," Simon said. "Admit to a lapse in executive oversight. We pay the fine. We settle the lawsuits. You step down as CEO. The company survives. Byron survives. You take the hit, Walter. You are the father. It is what fathers do." I looked at Byron again. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "Dad," he whispered, "I don't know what to do. If they charge me, I lose everything. Courtney will leave me. My life is over." The silence in that boardroom was heavier than the grave. I looked at the empire I built. Then I looked at my son. It wasn't a choice. It was a sacrifice. "Give me the pen," I said. I signed. I signed away my reputation. I signed away my position. I signed away the company. I admitted to negligence I didn't commit to save a son who was actually guilty. I thought I was being a hero. I thought I was being a father. I opened my eyes in the dark motel room. The fever burned behind my eyelids. I was a fool. I hadn't saved him. I had enabled him. Simon knew. Byron knew. They played me. They used my love as a weapon against me. They knew I would never let my son fall, so they pushed me off the cliff instead. The realization was a physical pain sharper than the cold, deeper than the hunger. I had sacrificed my life for a boy who wouldn't even let me sleep in his basement. The phone rang. The sound shattered the silence of the room like a gunshot. I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was midnight. Who knew I was here? I stared at the cracked screen of my cell phone lying on the nightstand. It vibrated against the cheap wood. Unknown caller. I reached out and answered it. My hand trembled. "Hello." My voice was a rasp, thick with sleep and sickness. Walter, the voice on the other end, was deep, commanding, and utterly devoid of pity. It was the same voice from before. "Cornelius Graves." "Graves," I said. "How did you find me?" "I told you, Walter. I have been watching you, and frankly, I am disappointed." "The Blue Star Motel. You are better than this." I gripped the phone tighter. "I don't have time for your games, Graves. I am tired. I am sick. Leave me alone." "You don't have the luxury of being tired," Graves snapped. "And you certainly don't have the luxury of self-pity. Look out your window." I hesitated. I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the window. The curtains were stiff with grime. I pulled them back just an inch. Outside in the parking lot filled with rusted sedans and pickup trucks sat a Phantom. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was pristine, gleaming under the flickering streetlights like a dark jewel in a pile of trash. The engine was running a low, powerful purr that vibrated through the glass. "That is my car," Graves said. "My driver is waiting. Pack your things." "I don't take handouts," I said, my pride flaring up one last time. "Especially not from you. We were rivals, Graves. You tried to buy me out for years. I am not offering a handout, Walter. I am offering a job. I am offering a weapon. You want to die in that room eating instant noodles while your son sells off your fleet piece by piece? Or do you want to get even?" The question hung in the air. I looked at the noodles on the table. I looked at the door with the chair wedged under the handle. I thought about Byron's face as he handed me those crumpled bills. I thought about Courtney's sneer. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to destroy the people who did this to you," Graves said. "And I think you do too. But you can't do it from a motel room. Get in the car, Walter. Bring your anger. Leave the pity." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment listening to the dial tone. Then I moved. I didn't pack my clothes. I didn't fold them. I threw them into the suitcases with a violence that surprised me. I put on my coat. I checked my reflection in the cracked mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But my eyes were different. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by something cold and hard. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. I pulled out my old pocket knife. It was a simple thing, a tool I had carried since I was a trucker. I opened the blade. It was sharp. I closed it and put it back in my pocket. I wasn't going to this meeting as a beggar. I wasn't going as a victim. I was going as a man who was ready to cut ties, cut losses, and if necessary, cut throats. I removed the chair from the door. I unlocked the deadbolt. I stepped out into the night air. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet. I walked past the reception office where the clerk was sleeping. I walked straight to the black car. The rear door opened before I even reached it. A large man in a suit stepped out and took my bags without a word. He held the door open for me. I stopped. I looked back at room 7. I looked at the Blue Star Motel. I made a silent vow. I would never be this helpless again. I would never be this poor again. And the next time I saw my son, I wouldn't be standing on his porch in the rain. I would be standing over him. I ducked my head and climbed into the leather interior of the Rolls-Royce. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, shutting out the sirens, the smell, and the old Walter Hart. The car pulled away, gliding smoothly over the potholes, heading toward the city skyline where the wolves lived. And tonight, I was joining the pack. The iron gates of the Graves estate swung open with a silent, heavy grace that spoke of old money and impenetrable power. As the Rolls-Royce glided up the winding driveway lined with oak trees that had stood since before my grandfather was born, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. It was the same feeling I used to get before a union negotiation or a hostile takeover defense. It was the instinct to armor myself. I was entering the lion's den, and I was doing it without a whip or a chair. All I had was my pocket knife and the fever burning in my blood. The car stopped in front of a limestone mansion that looked more like a government building than a home. The driver opened my door. I stepped out, buttoning my coat to hide the stains on my shirt. I would not let Cornelius Graves see me shivering. I walked up the stone steps, my head held high. A butler opened the door before I could knock, leading me through a foyer that echoed with the sound of my cheap shoes on marble. We entered a library that smelled of leather cigar smoke and ruthlessness. Cornelius Graves was standing by the fireplace, his back to me. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with hair as white as the marble floor. He didn't turn around when I entered. He didn't offer a drink. He didn't offer a seat. He didn't offer the fake pleasantries that men of our stature usually trade like currency. "You look terrible," Walter Graves said, still looking at the fire. "I have had a bad week, Neil," I replied, using the nickname I knew he hated. It was a small jab, a way to remind him that I was his peer, not his employee. "I didn't come here to discuss my fashion choices. You said you had a proposition." Graves turned around. His face was lined like a roadmap of hard decisions. His eyes were blue ice. He walked over to his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of wood that separated us. He didn't sit down. He picked up a thick manila envelope and tossed it across the desk. It slid over the polished surface and stopped right at the edge, inches from my hand. "Open it," Graves commanded. I looked at him, then at the envelope. I reached out and opened the clasp. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. They were glossy, brutal, and undeniable. They were photos of the accident that had ended my career, the accident that had killed a driver and paralyzed a young mother. I had seen photos like this in the courtroom, grainy black and white copies, but these were different. These were close-ups, extreme close-ups of the undercarriage of the truck. I stared at the first image. It showed the brake line. It was severed. I frowned. I brought the photo closer to my face, my hands shaking slightly. I knew trucks. I knew every bolt, every hose, every wire. When a brake line bursts from pressure or wear it frays, it looks like an exploded cigar. The edges are rough, jagged. This line was clean. It was a straight diagonal cut, the kind of cut made by a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. I looked at the next photo. It was the same line from a different angle. There was no rust. There was no corrosion. The line had been brand new before it was cut. I looked up at Graves. My heart was hammering against my ribs harder than it had in the motel. "This wasn't negligence," I whispered. "This was sabotage." Graves nodded slowly. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. "It was sabotage, Walter, and you took the fall for it. You plead guilty to negligence to save the company, thinking it was a maintenance oversight. But it was not an oversight. It was an assassination attempt on your legacy." My mind raced. Who my competitors? The union, you Graves let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Me, Walter. If I wanted to destroy you, I would have bought your debt and foreclosed on you years ago. I like to beat my opponents in the open market, not in the dark with wire cutters." No, this was someone on the inside. Someone who had access to the maintenance yard after hours. I shook my head. My security is tight. No one gets in without a badge. Exactly, Graves said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk. I looked at it. It was a maintenance log. It was dated the night before the accident. It authorized an emergency brake inspection on Unit 404, the truck that crashed. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a signature. It was a scrawl I had seen 1,000 times. I had seen it on report cards. I had seen it on birthday cards. I had seen it on the check I gave him for his house. Approved by Byron Hart, Director of Operations. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. No, I said. My voice was low, a growl of denial. No. This is a mistake. Byron is incompetent, yes. He is lazy, yes. But he is not a killer. He is my son. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't kill innocent people just to hurt me. He didn't do it to hurt you. Walter Graves said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming almost gentle in its brutality. He did it to remove you. He did it because he knew that as long as you were CEO, he would never be anything more than the boss's son. He needed a crisis big enough to force you out, but not big enough to bankrupt the company. He miscalculated. He cut the line too deep. He didn't mean to kill anyone, perhaps, but he meant to cause the crash. You are lying, I shouted. The anger exploded out of me. I stood up straight, facing Graves. You are trying to turn me against him. Why? What do you gain from this? You want my client list. You want my routes. I want to win. Walter Graves shouted back, his voice echoing off the book-lined walls. And I can't win against a ghost. I bought your debt today. Did you know that I own Phoenix Holdings now? I own you, but I didn't buy it to bury you. I bought it because I hate incompetence. And your son is the definition of incompetent. He is selling off your assets for pennies on the dollar to my competitors. He is dismantling your legacy to buy sports cars and jewelry for that wife of his. He stopped. He took a deep breath. He looked at me with something that looked almost like pity. I hated it. You don't believe me, Graves said. You think a father's love is stronger than a son's greed. I stared at him. I remembered Byron's face at the door. I remembered him handing me the crumpled bills. I remembered the coldness, but murder sabotage. That was a leap I couldn't make. Show me proof, I said. Real proof. Not just a signature on a piece of paper. Anyone could have forged that. Graves reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small digital recorder. He placed it on the desk between us. My private investigator recorded this 3 days ago, Graves said. It was taken at a restaurant downtown. La Maison. Your son and his wife were celebrating what I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Celebrating your resignation, Graves said. He pressed play. The audio was clear. There was the clinking of silverware, the murmur of a restaurant, and then the voice. It was Byron. There was no mistaking it. He sounded relaxed. He sounded happy. I am telling you, Courtney, it is over, Byron said. The old man signed the plea deal. He is out. The board is naming me interim CEO tomorrow. Then came Courtney's voice, high, sharp, excited. Finally. I thought he would never let go. He was going to die in that chair. He practically did. Byron laughed, a sound that tore through my heart. You should have seen him, Court. He looked so defeated. He actually thinks he is saving me. He thinks he is taking the bullet for the maintenance crew. And the settlement, Courtney asked. Insurance covers most of it, Byron said. We sell off the older fleet to cover the fines. We downsize. And then we sell the whole thing to Global Transport. They have been offering a buyout for years. Sell, I whispered. I never wanted to sell. But what about Walter? Courtney asked on the tape. What if he tries to come back? What if he wants to stay at the house? Byron sighed. The sound of someone dealing with a nuisance. We won't let him. If he pushes it, we put him in a home. There is that facility in the North District, Shady Pines. It is cheap. We can use the power of attorney he signed during the lawsuit preparations. We declare him incompetent due to stress and trauma. We lock him away, Court. And then we enjoy the money. Shady Pines. Courtney giggled. It sounds dreadful. It is, Byron said. But it is what he deserves for making me wait this long. Cheers, babe. To the future. Cheers, Courtney said. To us. Graves pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a world ending. I stood there staring at the small black device. I replayed the words in my head. He thinks he is saving me. We lock him away. Shady Pines. My knees gave out. I didn't fall, but I sank into the leather chair opposite the desk. I felt cold. Colder than I had felt in the rain. Colder than I had felt in the motel. This was the cold of death. The Walter Hart who had walked into this room, the father who wanted to believe in his son, died in that chair. I looked at my hands. They were the hands that had held Byron when he had a fever. They were the hands that had taught him to throw a baseball. They were the hands that had built a kingdom for him, and he wanted to lock me in a cage. I looked up at Graves. My vision was blurry, but I wasn't crying. I was past tears. I was in a place beyond grief. Why, I asked. My voice was a ghost. "Why did you show me this?" Because Graves said, leaning forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "I know what it is like to be underestimated. I know what it is like to have people wait for you to die. And I see a fire in you, Walter. It is dim, but it is there. You can sit in that chair and die of a broken heart. You can go to Shady Pines and stare at the wall, or you can stand up." I looked at the photos of the cut brake line. I looked at the recorder. I felt the knife in my pocket. It felt heavy. It felt real. I slowly stood up. The fever was gone. The exhaustion was gone. In their place was a cold, hard clarity. My son was dead. The man in that house was a stranger who had destroyed my life, a stranger who had hurt innocent people, a stranger who needed to be stopped. I smoothed my jacket. I looked Cornelius Graves in the eye. "You said you had a proposition," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of the man who had built Hart Logistics. "I do," Graves said. A slow smile spread across his face. "I don't want your money, Graves," I said. "I don't want a handout," Good Graves said. "Because I am not offering one. I am offering a partnership. I supply the capital. You supply the knowledge. We take back your company. We take back your house. And we crush the man who did this." I walked to the window. I looked out at the dark grounds of the estate. Somewhere out there in my house, Byron was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of the millions he was going to make by selling my life's work. He thought I was weak. He thought I was finished. I turned back to Graves. "I'm in," I said. "But I have one condition." "Name it," Graves said. "I don't just want to crush him," I said. "I want him to know it was me. I want to look him in the eye when he loses everything. I want him to feel the rain." Graves extended his hand. "Deal," he said. I shook his hand. His grip was like iron. Mine was just as strong. "Let's get to work," I said. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, Walter Hart the father was buried, and Walter Hart the Avenger was born. "You think this ends with your son Graves?" asked, his voice cutting through the silence of the library like a serrated blade. "You think this is just about a spoiled boy wanting his inheritance early? You are thinking too small, Walter. That has always been your problem. You play the game with your heart while the rest of us play with knives." I looked up from the recorder. My hands were still shaking, but the shock was beginning to harden into something else, something colder. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I just heard my son planning to lock me away. What more is there?" Graves walked around the desk. He pulled a second file from the stack. It was thinner than the first, but the contents were far more venomous. He opened it and slid a photograph toward me. It was a picture of Courtney. She looked younger. Her hair was different, darker and less styled, but the eyes were the same, cold and calculating. She was standing next to a man I recognized instantly. A man I had hated for 30 years. A man named Arthur Vance, who ran the shipping cartels in the East. "Vance," I whispered. "Why is Courtney with Arthur Vance?" "Because she is his daughter," Graves said. "She is illegitimate. He kept her hidden. He kept her off the books. But he raised her. He trained her. She didn't meet your son by accident at that charity gala 3 years ago, Walter. She was planted. Vance knew he couldn't beat you in the market. Your reputation was too clean. Your contracts were too solid. So he sent her in to dismantle the House of Hart from the inside." I felt the room spin. It wasn't just betrayal, it was an invasion. I thought about the wedding. I thought about how Vance had sent a generic gift but didn't attend. I thought about how Courtney had slowly isolated Byron, how she had whispered poison in his ear about my management style, how she had encouraged him to cut corners on maintenance. "She is a corporate saboteur," Graves continued. "She did the same thing to a tech firm in Silicon Valley 5 years ago. She married the VP, divorced him after a scandal, and walked away with a settlement that bankrupted the company. This isn't love gone wrong, Walter. This is a business transaction, and you were the asset being liquidated." My grip on the armrest of the chair tightened until the leather creaked. My son was not just a traitor, he was a pawn. A stupid, weak pawn in a game played by men he didn't even know existed. "Does Byron know?" I asked. "Does he know who she really is?" Graves shook his head. "No. He thinks he is the mastermind. He thinks he won the trophy wife and the crown. He has no idea that the moment the sale to Global Transport goes through, Vance is going to divorce him, take half, and leave him with nothing but the guilt of betraying his father. She is going to eat him alive, Walter." I stood up. The physical weakness I had felt in the motel was gone. It was replaced by a surge of adrenaline that felt like fire in my veins. Vance wanted my company. He wanted my legacy, and he used my son to get it. "This changes everything," I said. My voice was low. "It changes nothing." Graves countered. "You are still broke. You are still homeless, and tomorrow morning your son is going to announce the sale of your fleet, unless you act." I looked at the photo of Courtney and Vance one last time. I memorized their faces. I etched the hatred into my bones. "I am not going to let them win," I said. "Then take my money," Graves said. "Let me fund your legal defense. Let me buy your way back in." I looked at Cornelius Graves. He was offering me a lifeline. He was offering me salvation. But I knew how Graves operated. Nothing was free. If I took his charity, I would be his pet. I would be another pawn. "No," I said. Graves frowned. "Excuse me." I said no. I repeated firmly. "I don't want your charity, Graves. I don't want your pity money. If we are going to do this, we are going to do it as equals." "Equals?" Graves laughed. A dry barking sound. "Look at you, Walter. You are wearing a suit that smells like rain and desperation. You have $60 to your name. What exactly do you have to offer me that makes us equals?" I tapped my temple with my index finger. "I have this. I have 40 years of navigating this city. I know where the bodies are buried, Graves. I know which union leaders can be bought and which ones are honest. I know the zoning loopholes that Vance is using to move his cargo. I know the secret routes your drivers use to avoid the way stations." Graves stopped laughing. He narrowed his eyes. "I have a ledger in my head," I continued, stepping closer to him. "A ledger of every favor owed to me by city councilmen and police captains. Favors I never called in because I was an honest man. But I am not an honest man anymore. I am a desperate man. And I am offering you those favors. I am offering you the entire underground map of the logistics industry in this state. Information that is worth 10 times the debt you bought from the bank." I saw the calculation happening behind Graves' eyes. He was a shark and he just smelled blood in the water. But this time it wasn't my blood. It was Vance's. "You want to trade your network for my resources?" Graves asked. "I want to trade my brain for your sword," I corrected. "I will give you the strategy to destroy Vance. I will give you the leverage to crush his cartel. In exchange, you give me the capital to destroy my son and take back my company. We destroy them both. You get the monopoly you always wanted. I get my dignity." Graves walked over to the window. He looked out at the dark estate. He was silent for a long time. I held my breath. This was the gamble. This was the moment where I either became a partner or a beggar. "You are a dangerous man when you are cornered," Walter Graves said softly. "I learned from the best," I replied. Graves turned around. A slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a general who had just found his best commander. "It is a deal," he said. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was iron. Mine was steel. "But we have to move fast," Graves said. "The auction for your central warehouse is in 2 weeks. Byron is moving quickly. We need to get you back in the game. But we can't do it with you looking like that." He gestured to my wet clothes, my gray stubble, my exhausted face. "Walter Hart is dead," Graves said. "The man who walked into this house doesn't exist anymore. If you are going to destroy your son, you need to become someone else. Someone he doesn't recognize until it is too late." "I understand," I said. Good Graves pressed a button on his desk intercom. Benson, prepare the guest suite. And call my tailor, call my barber. We have a resurrection to schedule. I walked into the bathroom of the guest suite. It was larger than my entire apartment back at the motel. The floors were heated marble. The mirrors were framed in gold. I stripped off the wetsuit. I threw it into the corner. It landed with a wet thud. That suit was the last remnant of the old Walter. The Walter who believed in family. The Walter who believed in fair play. I didn't want it anymore. I stepped into the shower. The water was hot, scalding hot. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I wanted to wash away the feeling of the rain. I wanted to wash away the feeling of Byron's hand pressing that money into my palm. I washed away the pity. I washed away the grief. When I stepped out, I felt raw, new. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the man staring back. He was old. His eyes were tired. His beard was a scruffy gray mess that made him look like a derelict. I picked up the straight razor Graves had left for me. The handle was ivory. The blade was sharp enough to split a hair. I applied the shaving cream. I looked at my eyes again. "Goodbye, Walter," I whispered. I drew the blade down my cheek. The gray hair fell away, revealing the skin underneath. I shaved it all off. The beard I had worn for 10 years since my wife died. The beard that my granddaughter used to tug on. I scraped it away, stroke by stroke. When I was finished, a stranger looked back at me. His jaw was square and set. His face was leaner, harder. Without the beard, the lines of age were more visible, but they looked like scars now, not wrinkles. They looked like armor. I walked into the bedroom. On the bed lay a suit. It wasn't one of my conservative gray suits. It was a midnight blue Italian wool cut sharp and aggressive. A white shirt with French cuffs. A silk tie the color of dried blood. I put it on. The fabric felt like a second skin. It fit perfectly. I fastened the cufflinks. They were gold heavy and cold. I put on the shoes, polished to a mirror shine. I walked over to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. I didn't look like a retired grandfather anymore. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a titan. I looked like a predator. I reached into the pocket of the new jacket. I transferred my old pocket knife from the pile of wet clothes. It was the only thing I kept, a reminder. I adjusted my tie. I narrowed my eyes. The kindness that had defined me for 71 years was gone. In its place was a cold, burning calculation. I was ready. I opened the door and walked out into the hallway. My footsteps on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots. I wasn't just walking to meet Graves. I was walking to war. And God help anyone who stood in my way. The Rolls-Royce dropped me off 2 blocks from the house. I had changed out of the Italian suit and back into my wet-stained clothes. I rubbed dirt on my face and hands. I practiced my walk, a shuffle, a limp, the gait of a man who had been beaten by the world. This was it. The final test. A part of me, the father in me, hoped he would pass. I hoped that seeing me like this, broken and starving, would crack the ice around his heart. But the other part of me, the part that had signed the deal with Graves, knew better. I walked up the driveway. It was evening now, and the house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I could hear music drifting from the backyard, laughter, the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating my demise, celebrating the sale, celebrating their freedom from the old man. I reached the front door, but I didn't knock. I walked around to the side gate, the one that led to the patio. I wanted them to see me. I wanted his guests to see me. I pushed the gate open. It creaked, a rusty protest in the night air. The patio was crowded. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns, waiters circulating with trays of champagne. In the center of it all stood Byron. He was laughing, his head thrown back, holding a glass of scotch. Courtney was by his side, glittering in diamonds that were bought with my blood. I stepped into the light. "Byron," I croaked. My voice was a rasp, perfect for the role. "Byron, please." The laughter died instantly. Heads turned. The music seemed to stop. Byron froze. He lowered his glass slowly, his eyes widening as they landed on me. I must have looked like a ghost, a specter of guilt haunting his victory party. "Dad," he whispered. I took a step forward, stumbling slightly. "I haven't eaten in 2 days, son. I lost my wallet. The motel kicked me out. Please, just a plate of food, just a glass of water. I will sleep in the shed. I won't bother anyone." Byron looked around at his guests. I saw the panic in his eyes. This wasn't concern for his father. This was social terror. He was the young tycoon, the heir apparent. He couldn't have a beggar for a father. "Who is that, Byron?" a man asked. He was tall with a silver fox demeanor. I recognized him. He was the CEO of Global Transport, the man buying my company. Byron swallowed hard. He looked at me, then at the CEO, then back at me. I saw the calculation. I saw the decision form in his mind. "He is nobody," Byron said, his voice loud and clear. Just the old gardener. We had to let him go a few months ago. He has issues. With drink. With his mind. The gardener. He denied me. He erased me. In front of the man buying my life's work, he turned his father into a fired employee. "Oh," the CEO said, relaxing. "Poor soul. Security should handle that." Byron stepped toward me, his face a mask of anger. "You need to leave, Walter," he hissed. "Not even calling me dad anymore. You are trespassing. Get out before I call the police." I looked him in the eye. "I am hungry, Byron," I said softly. "I am your flesh and blood. I don't know you," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please leave my property." Then Courtney stepped forward. Her face was twisted in a sneer of absolute disgust. She didn't see a father-in-law. She saw a stain on her perfect evening. "You heard him," she snapped. "Get out! Or do I need to make you—" She turned to a large man standing near the edge of the patio. He was holding the leash of their 2 Dobermans. Guard dogs. Dogs I had bought them for protection. "Release them," Courtney ordered. "Byron, no!" I shouted, looking at my son. "Don't do this!" Byron didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked away. He looked at his shoes. He let it happen. The handler unclipped the leashes. The dogs barked a savage, guttural sound. They bounded toward me, teeth-bared eyes locked on the intruder. I turned and ran. I ran not because I was terrified, though my heart was pounding. I ran because the script demanded it. I scrambled back through the gate, my feet slipping on the wet grass. I heard the snapping of jaws behind me. I heard the guests gasping, some laughing nervously. I made it to the street just as the dogs hit the fence, throwing themselves against the wood in a frenzy. I kept running. I ran down the block into the shadows where the Rolls-Royce was waiting. I leaned against the car, gasping for breath. My chest heaved. Sweat mixed with the dirt on my face. I looked back at the house. The lights were still shining. The music had started again. They had already forgotten me. The gardener was gone. The pest was removed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I wiped the dirt from my face. I stood up straight. A smile spread across my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was cold. It was the smile of a judge delivering a death sentence. He had failed. He had failed the final test. There was no redemption now, no mercy. I opened the car door and slid into the back seat. Graves was there watching me. "Well," he asked. "He released the dogs," I said. Graves nodded slowly. "Good. Then we are clear. We are clear," I agreed. "Burn it down, Neil. Burn it all down." The car pulled away into the night. The father was gone. Only the executioner remained, and the execution was scheduled to begin at dawn. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Phoenix Holdings building, turning the office into a fortress of light. I sat in the executive chair, swiveling slowly to look at the bank of monitors on the wall. I wasn't wearing my old wet wool suit. I was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece that cost more than the car I used to drive. I wasn't Walter Hart, the retired trucker. I was the silent partner of Cornelius Graves, and today I was pulling the trigger. It had been 1 week since the incident with the dogs. 1 week of silence. 1 week of maneuvering assets in the dark. Graves had given me access to his legal team, his forensic accountants, and his private security. We had moved like ghosts, buying up the promissory notes, the liens, and the debts that Byron had scattered across the city like confetti. He thought he was living in a mansion. He didn't realize he was living in a house of cards, and I had just bought the wind. On the center monitor, a live feed from a security camera showed the front porch of my son's house. It was 8:00 a.m. The courier I had hired walked up the driveway. He wasn't carrying a pizza or a package from Amazon. He was carrying a certified letter in a red envelope. I watched Byron open the door. He looked hungover. His hair was messy, his silk robe tied loosely around his waist. He signed for the letter with a scowl, probably thinking it was a contract for the warehouse sale. He ripped it open right there on the porch. I zoomed in. I couldn't see the words, but I knew them by heart. I had dictated them. Notice of immediate foreclosure. Default on loan agreement number 4099. Accelerated payment demanded. I saw Byron's face go slack. He blinked, reading it again. He shook his head, a nervous, jerky motion. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers flying across the screen. I knew what he was doing. He was checking his bank app. He was looking for the safety net. On another screen, a data stream from the bank's server access, courtesy of Graves' influence on the board, showed the status of Byron's accounts. Account status, frozen. Reason, suspicious activity, fraud investigation. Byron stared at his phone. He tapped the screen violently, as if hitting it would make the money reappear. He started to pace small, frantic circles on the expensive doormat. He was realizing that the ground beneath him wasn't solid. It was a trap door, and I had just pulled the lever. Then his phone rang. I didn't have a camera at the spa, but I didn't need one. The report from the private investigator came through on my tablet a moment later. Courtney was at the Lumina Wellness Center. She had just finished a $300 facial and a mud wrap. She had walked to the counter wrapped in a plush white robe and handed over the black credit card she was so proud of. The card that was linked to the corporate expense account. The account I had built. The card was declined. I could imagine the scene perfectly. The receptionist, polite but firm. Courtney's laugh, high-pitched and nervous. "Try it again," she would say. "There must be a mistake." They tried it again. Declined. Code 04, pickup card. The receptionist would have taken a pair of scissors. I had specifically instructed the credit card company to issue a confiscation order for fraud. Courtney would have watched her mouth open as the plastic was cut in two. I watched Byron on the monitor. He answered his phone. He held it away from his ear. Even without audio, I could tell Courtney was screaming. Her perfect morning had shattered. She was humiliated. And when Courtney was humiliated, she needed blood. Byron was shouting back now. He was waving the red envelope in the air, gesturing at an empty street. He looked like a man drowning. He hung up the phone and immediately dialed another number. I looked at the burner phone sitting on the desk in front of me. It was the number for my old cell. The one he had called for years, only when he needed money. The one he had ignored when I needed a home. I waited for it to ring. But it didn't. I had disconnected the line 3 days ago. On the monitor, Byron pulled the phone away from his ear. He stared at it in disbelief. He dialed again, then again. He slammed the phone onto the porch railing. He couldn't believe it. The old man wasn't there. The ATM was out of order. The punching bag had vanished. He ran inside the house. A few minutes later, he came out dressed in a suit, but he looked disheveled. He jumped into his leased Mercedes and sped out of the driveway. He was heading to the bank. I pressed a button on the intercom. "Graves," I said. "He is on his way to First National." Good Graves' voice came back. "The stage is set." I switched the monitor feed to the lobby of First National Bank. It was a grand, marble-floored space designed to make you feel small and the money feel big. Byron stormed in through the revolving doors. He didn't wait in line. He marched straight to the glass-walled office of the branch manager. He slammed his hands on the manager's desk. I could see the manager, a calm woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had worked with me for 20 years, look up over her glasses. She didn't flinch. She said something to him, gesturing to a computer screen. Byron was yelling now. Other customers were turning around. Security guards stepped closer, hands hovering over their belts. Byron pointed at the screen. He pointed at himself. He was playing the "Do you know who I am" card. Mrs. Higgins shook her head. She handed him a piece of paper. He grabbed it. He read it. I knew what it said. It said that First National no longer held his mortgage. It said that due to discrepancies in his income statements he had falsified to qualify for the loan, claiming he was the sole owner of assets that were actually mine. The bank had exercised its right to sell the debt. They had sold it to a private equity firm, a firm called Phoenix Holdings. Byron looked up. He shouted something that looked like, "Who is?" "Phoenix." Mrs. Higgins pointed to the door. Byron didn't leave. He grabbed a chair and threw it. It skidded across the polished floor, crashing into a velvet rope stand. That was the signal. 2 large security guards moved in. They didn't ask him nicely. One grabbed his left arm, the other his right. Byron struggled, kicking and screaming like a toddler being dragged out of a toy store. His suit jacket tore at the shoulder. His expensive watch banged against the doorframe. They threw him out onto the sidewalk. He landed on his hands and knees, the foreclosure notice fluttering down beside him. Passers-by stopped to look. Some took out their phones. The son of Walter Hart, the heir to the logistics empire tossed out of a bank like a common drunk. I sat back in my chair in the high tower of Phoenix Holdings. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, and hot. It tasted like justice. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that Phoenix Holdings was the bird that rose from the ashes of the fire he started. He didn't know that the man sitting in the president's chair, the man holding the deed to his house and the leash to his life, was the same man he had left in the rain. He stood up, brushing the dirt off his knees. He looked around, wild-eyed. He had no money, he had no credit, he had no home, and he had no father. I reached for the phone to call Graves. "Phase 1 is complete," I said. "He is broken." Now Graves said, "We squeeze." I hung up. I looked at the image of my son on the screen, looking lost in the city he thought he owned. "You wanted me to find somewhere else to live, Byron," I whispered to the empty room. "I did. I live in your nightmares now." I sat in the dim light of the surveillance van parked 3 blocks from the Ritz-Carlton. Next to me sat Graves's private investigator, a man named Sterling who looked like he hadn't slept in a week but had the eyes of a hawk. On the small screen in front of us, a grainy video played. It was taken from a hidden camera inside the hotel bar. There she was, Courtney. She looked radiant, far more alive than she ever looked with my son. She was wearing a red dress that was cut low and tight, a dress I had never seen before. Sitting across from her, holding her hand across the small table, was Simon Fletcher, my lawyer, the man who had convinced me to plead guilty, the man who had helped destroy my life. I watched as Simon leaned in close, whispering something in her ear. Courtney threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine laugh, not the sharp, brittle sound she used at charity events. It was the laugh of a woman in love, or at least a woman in lust. "Turn up the audio," I said. Sterling adjusted a dial. The ambient noise of the bar faded, and their voices came through clear and damning. "He is panicking," Simon said, swirling his martini. "The foreclosure notice arrived this morning. He called me 5 times. He thinks I can stop it." Courtney took a sip of her wine. "Can you stop it?" Simon smirked. "I can delay it, just long enough for the warehouse auction to go through. Once that cash hits the corporate account, we siphon it to the offshore shell company we set up. Then you file for divorce. You cite financial instability and fraud. You take half of whatever is left, which won't be much, and you leave him with the debt." Courtney sighed, tracing the rim of her glass. "It seems cruel, Simon. He really does love me, in his own pathetic way." "He is a sinking ship, darling," Simon said. "You don't stay on a sinking ship because the captain loves you. You get on the lifeboat. And I am the lifeboat." I stared at the screen. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just greed. It was a coordinated demolition. My son was being carved up like a turkey, and the woman holding the knife was the one sleeping in his bed. I felt a strange, twisted pang of sympathy for Byron. He was a fool, yes. He was weak, yes. But he didn't deserve this. No one deserved this. He thought he was playing the game, but he was just the board they were playing on. "Send me that file," I told Sterling. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "I am going to light a fuse," I said. The next morning, a courier arrived at the executive offices of Hart Logistics, or what was left of it. The sign out front was peeling. The parking lot was half empty. Inside, Byron was sitting in my old office, trying to look like a CEO while the walls closed in around him. The courier placed a small, elegantly wrapped box on his desk. It was heavy. It was wrapped in silver paper with a white ribbon. There was no card. Byron frowned. He hadn't ordered anything. He picked it up, shaking it slightly. He tore off the paper. Inside was a velvet jewelry box. He opened it. Resting on the black cushion was a watch. It was a Patek Philippe. Gold, heavy, expensive. It was a watch that cost $50,000. Byron stared at it. He didn't own a Patek Philippe. He couldn't afford one. He looked closer. Engraved on the back of the watch case were initials, SF Simon Fletcher. Underneath the watch, folded neatly, was a receipt. It was a credit card receipt from a jeweler in Paris. The date was 3 months ago. The card used to pay for it was a corporate Amex. A card issued to Courtney Hart. The memo line on the receipt read, "Happy anniversary, my love." I watched Byron's face on the hidden camera I had installed in the office days ago. The confusion morphed into shock, then into a slow, dawning horror. He knew that watch. He had seen it on Simon's wrist during their meetings. He had admired it. He picked up the receipt. He read it again. My love. He dropped the watch onto the desk as if it were radioactive. He stood up, pacing the room. He ran his hands through his hair. He was trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Courtney bought it for him and... No, the initials were SF. He grabbed his phone. He dialed Courtney. I watched him wait, tapping his foot nervously. Hey, babe. Courtney's voice came through the speakerphone. I am at the gym. What is up? Byron stared at the watch. Hey, he said, his voice tight. I just got a package. A watch. A watch. Courtney asked, her voice faltering slightly. What kind of watch? Patek Byron said. It has Simon Fletcher's initials on it. And a receipt with your signature. There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. Oh, that, Courtney said, her laugh sounding forced and shrill. That must be a mix-up. Simon asked me to pick it up for him when I was in Paris last year. He paid me back in cash. The courier must have delivered it to the wrong address. Why would they send it to you? Byron narrowed his eyes. He looked at the receipt. It said, Happy Anniversary. Simon wasn't married. Why does the receipt say Happy Anniversary? Byron asked. It was his anniversary at the firm, Courtney stammered. Byron, you are being paranoid. I have to go. My trainer is waiting. She hung up. Byron stood there, the dial tone buzzing in the empty office. He looked at the watch. He looked at the phone. For the first time in his life, the bubble of his entitlement was pierced by a sharp needle of doubt. He wasn't the king. He was the mark. But he couldn't accept it. Not yet. He shoved the watch into his drawer and slammed it shut. He sat down, putting his head in his hands. It was just a mix-up. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, then everything he had done, betraying me, destroying the company, was for nothing. That night, I parked the rental car down the street from his house. I watched through binoculars as he pulled into the driveway. He sat in his car for 10 minutes before getting out. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. Inside, the lights were on in the living room. Through the sheer curtains, I could see Courtney sitting on the sofa, texting. She was smiling at her phone. Byron walked in. He didn't kiss her. He stood in the doorway watching her. Who are you texting? He asked. I could read his lips. Courtney jumped. She hid the phone quickly. Just my mother, she said. She is sick again. Byron walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a drink. He didn't look at her. He looked at his reflection in the mirror above the bar. He looked tired. He looked old. Is she? Byron asked. Or is she celebrating an anniversary? Courtney stood up. What is wrong with you today? You are acting crazy. Is this about the foreclosure I told you Simon is handling it? Simon, Byron repeated. Yeah, Simon is handling everything. He took a long drink. He was suspicious, yes, but he was also a coward. He didn't demand to see her phone. He didn't throw her out. He drank his scotch and let the poison of doubt settle in his gut. He was still clinging to the lie because the truth was too terrible to face. I lowered the binoculars. Not yet, son, I whispered. You don't get to break yet. We are just getting started. I started the car and drove away. The seed was planted. Now I just had to water it with fire. The central warehouse of Hart Logistics was more than just steel and concrete to me. It was the cathedral where I preached the gospel of hard work for 40 years. It was the place where I taught Byron how to drive a forklift when he was 16. It was where I spent Christmas Eves making sure packages got to families on time. And now I sat in the darkened viewing booth of the auction house watching my son sell it for scrap. The room was filled with sharks. Developers, competitors, and liquidators sat in rows holding numbered paddles. The air smelled of stale coffee and opportunism. Byron sat in the front row. He was sweating. He kept adjusting his tie, looking nervously at a man sitting 3 rows back. I knew that man. His name was Miller. He was a shady real estate flipper. Graves leaned over to me. Do you see the play? He asked. I see it, I replied. Miller is the straw man. It was a classic desperate move. Byron had rigged the auction. The plan was simple. He had likely scared off legitimate buyers by leaking rumors about structural damage or environmental hazards. Miller would buy the warehouse for a fraction of its value. Then, once the dust settled and the foreclosure on Byron's house was paid off with the quick cash, they would flip the property for its true worth and split the profit. It was illegal. It was stupid. It was exactly the kind of plan Courtney would come up with. I looked at Courtney. She was sitting next to Byron, typing furiously on her phone. She didn't look at the stage. She was looking at the exit signs, calculating her escape route. She didn't care if the company survived. She just wanted enough cash to disappear before the ship went under. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium. He began his rapid-fire chant. The bidding started low, insultingly low. $2 million for a facility worth 20. Miller raised his paddle. 2.1. The room was silent. The legitimate developers were hesitant, spooked by the rumors Byron had spread. 2.1 going once the auctioneer called out. Byron let out a breath he had been holding. He exchanged a quick, triumphant glance with Miller. He thought he had pulled it off. He thought he was smarter than the market. He thought he was smarter than me. 2.1 going twice. Then the door at the back of the room opened. A man walked in. He was dressed in a gray suit that looked unremarkable, but I knew it cost more than Miller's car. He was Graves's personal attorney, but nobody in this room knew his face. He walked to the center aisle and raised his paddle. $5 million, he said. His voice was calm, cutting through the auctioneer's rhythm like a knife. Byron whipped his head around. His eyes went wide. This wasn't in the script. Miller looked confused. He looked at Byron for instructions. Byron gave a small, frantic nod. 5.1. Miller called out, his voice shaking slightly. 6 million, the gray suit said immediately. The room buzzed. The sharks smelled blood. They sat up straighter. This wasn't a liquidation anymore. This was a war. Byron turned to Courtney. She grabbed his arm, whispering something urgent. I could guess what she was saying. Who is that? Make it stop. But Byron couldn't stop it. He had started a fire he couldn't control. Miller bid again. 6.5. That was likely the limit of the cash they had scraped together. 10 million, the gray suit said. Byron gasped. I saw his shoulders slump, then stiffen. I saw the gears turning in his head. The panic was fading, replaced by a sudden, intoxicating greed. $10 million. That was enough to pay off the immediate debts. That was enough to save the house. That was enough to keep Courtney happy for another year. He forgot about the plan. He forgot about the long game. He forgot that without this warehouse, Hart Logistics ceased to function as a company. He just saw the dollar signs. He turned to Miller and gave a subtle shake of his head. Stop. Let him have it. He thought he had won the lottery. He didn't realize he was selling his oxygen tank to pay for a breathless future. 12 million, the gray suit said, bidding against himself just to drive the point home. Sold, the auctioneer shouted, slamming the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Byron jumped up. He hugged Courtney. She smiled, a real smile this time, the smile of a predator who just ate. They were high-fiving. They were celebrating the death of my legacy because it bought them a temporary reprieve. The auctioneer cleared his throat. The buyer has asked to make a brief statement regarding the future of the property. Byron sat down, looking smug. He probably expected the buyer to announce a luxury condo development or an Amazon fulfillment center. He expected to be congratulated for facilitating such a high-value deal. The man in the gray suit walked to the podium. He didn't look at Byron. He looked at the cameras that the industry press had set up in the back. My client has purchased this property not for commercial use, the man said. The room went quiet. Byron frowned. This facility was built by Walter Hart, the man continued. It was built on the principles of community and shelter. In light of recent events, specifically the tragic displacement of Walter Hart from his own home by his family, my client feels it is only fitting to repurpose this building. Byron's face went pale. The smile vanished from Courtney's lips. Effective immediately, the man announced this warehouse will be converted into the Walter Hart Center for the Homeless. It will serve as a shelter for the elderly who have been abandoned by their children. It will stand as a monument to the fact that dignity cannot be sold. The room erupted. Reporters started shouting questions. Photographers turned their lenses away from the podium and toward the front row, toward Byron. He sat there frozen. The implication was clear. It was public. The buyer wasn't just a developer. The buyer knew. The buyer knew that Byron had kicked his father out. The buyer knew that Walter Hart was homeless. Byron looked around, wild-eyed. He saw the judgment in the eyes of his peers. He saw the sneers of the competitors. He had just sold his father's legacy to build a monument to his own cruelty. Courtney covered her face with her hand, shielding herself from the cameras. She wasn't worried about Byron's reputation. She was worried about her social standing. She grabbed her purse and stood up, trying to push past Byron to get to the aisle. Byron grabbed her wrist. "Sit down," he hissed. "Don't you dare leave me here." She ripped her arm away. "You idiot," she spat loud enough for the people in the second row to hear. "You humiliated us. You told me the old man was handled." I watched from the booth. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of the equation balancing out. Graves handed me a glass of water. "A toast," he said. "To the new community center." I took the glass. "To the homeless," I said. Down below, Byron was trying to stand, trying to regain some shred of dignity. He buttoned his jacket. He turned to the press. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "My father he is in assisted living. This is a slanderous attack." The man in the gray suit leaned into the microphone one last time. "My client also wishes to inform Mr. Byron Hart that as the new owner of the property, all current inventory and logistical equipment inside the warehouse are considered abandoned property. He has 24 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed." Byron staggered back as if he had been punched. The inventory. The trucks parked in the loading bays, the sorting machines. They were still inside. In his rush to sell the shell, he had forgotten to move the heart. He had just sold the company's assets for free. He looked up at the booth. He couldn't see me through the tinted glass, but he knew. He knew I was there. He knew this wasn't a stranger. This was his father. I placed my hand on the glass. "Run, Byron," I whispered. "Run while you still can." He turned and fled. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the questions, ignoring the flashes. He ran out the side door, leaving Courtney behind. She stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space where her husband had been. Then she turned and walked out the main entrance, her head high, pretending she didn't know the man who had just run away. The auction was over. The warehouse was mine, and Byron Hart was not just broke, he was a pariah. I turned to Graves. "What is next?" I asked. Graves smiled. "Now we make him sign his confession." I nodded. I was ready. The public humiliation was the jab. The next move would be the knockout, and I had the perfect bait. Byron was living in a purgatory of his own making. He was staying in the guest room of his in-laws, a cramped space filled with boxes of Courtney's old cheerleading trophies and the smell of mothballs. His credit cards were dead plastic. His car had been repossessed the night before, towed away while the neighbors watched. He was a king without a kingdom, and panic was starting to eat him alive. I watched him from the camera feeds Graves had tapped into. He was pacing the small room, his phone in his hand, waiting for a miracle. And then I gave him one. I instructed the broker, a man named Mr. Thorne, who worked for Phoenix Holdings, to make the call. Thorne was a shark in a silk suit, a man who could sell water to a drowning man. He called Byron at noon. Mr. Hart, Thorne said, his voice smooth and professional. "I represent an international investment group. We are aware of your current liquidity issues regarding the foreclosure and the recent auction. My clients are interested in acquiring your remaining personal shares in Hart Logistics." Byron stopped pacing. He sat down on the edge of the twin bed. "Shares," he repeated. His voice cracked. "I thought I lost everything." "You still hold a 5% equity stake as the former director of operations," Thorne explained. "It is a residual asset. Usually it would be worthless given the bankruptcy. However, my clients are looking to consolidate total ownership to restructure the debt. They are willing to offer you a buyout." "How much?" Byron asked. I could see his knuckles turn white as he gripped the phone. $2 million, Thorne said. "Cash. Today." Byron gasped. It was audible. $2 million was not just a lifeline. It was a resurrection. It was enough to pay off the gambling debts he thought I didn't know about. It was enough to get Courtney back into a luxury hotel. It was enough to run. "I will take it," Byron said immediately. "When can we meet?" "There is a condition." Thorne added, his tone hardening slightly. "To finalize the sale and clear the company's liability insurance for the new owners, we need to close the book on the maintenance lawsuits. You will need to sign an affidavit accepting administrative responsibility for the oversight of the fleet maintenance during your tenure. It is a formality to satisfy the underwriters." Byron hesitated. He knew what that meant. He knew he was the one who had ordered the brake lines cut to sabotage me. Signing that paper wasn't just a formality. It was an admission that he was the captain of the ship when it hit the iceberg. "I don't know," Byron stammered. "That sounds like legal trouble." "It is a standard liability waiver." Thorne lied smoothly. "It protects the new owners from past negligence claims. Without it, the shares are worthless. Take the deal, Mr. Hart. Or don't. The offer expires at 5 p.m. I watched Byron hang up. He stared at the wall. He was terrified. He He knew he was guilty, but he also knew he was broke. He needed a push. I looked at the other monitor. Courtney was in the kitchen arguing with her mother about laundry. She looked miserable. "Send the text to Courtney," I told Graves. Graves typed a message from an anonymous number to Courtney's phone. "Your husband just got offered a $2 million buyout. Make sure he takes it." I watched Courtney check her phone. Her eyes lit up. The misery vanished, replaced by the predatory hunger I had seen in the restaurant video with Simon Fletcher. She dropped the laundry basket. She ran to the guest room. "Byron," she said, bursting through the door. "Is it true?" Byron looked up, startled. "Is what true?" "The buyout," she said, closing the door and locking it. "Did they offer you $2 million?" Byron nodded slowly. "Yes, but there is a catch, Court. They want me to sign a liability waiver for the maintenance issues. The accident." "So sign it," Courtney snapped. "It says I was responsible," Byron said. "It says I oversaw the repairs. If the police see that, they could reopen the investigation." Courtney walked over to him. She sat next to him on the bed. She put her hand on his knee. Her touch wasn't loving. It was possessive. "Byron, look at us," she hissed. "We are living in my parents' guest room. You have no car, you have no job. Simon isn't returning my calls." "We are drowning," Simon Byron muttered. He still didn't know the full extent of their affair, but he suspected. $2 million is freedom," Courtney whispered in his ear. "We can go to Europe. We can go to the Caymans. We can start over. Who cares about a piece of paper? Phoenix Holdings just wants to clear the books. They don't want to put you in jail. They want to make money." But what if Byron started? No what ifs. Courtney cut him off. She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of cruelty. "I am not staying here, Byron. If you don't sign that paper, I am leaving. I am filing for divorce tomorrow. I will take whatever scraps are left, and I will find a man who can actually provide for me." Byron looked at her. He looked at the fear of losing her. It was greater than the fear of prison. He was a man hollowed out by obsession. "You would leave me?" he asked, his voice small. "Watch me," Courtney said. "Sign the paper, Byron. Get the money, or I am gone. And I will take the dog. I will take the jewelry. I will take everything that isn't nailed down." Byron put his head in his hands. He was cornered. On one side the law, on the other side the woman who held his ego in her claws. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I will do it." Courtney smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing vibrations in the water. She kissed his forehead. "Good boy," she said. "Call them back. Tell them we want the cash in small bills." I watched from my office. I felt a cold resolve. He had made his choice. He had chosen the money over the truth. He had chosen her over his own safety. He is coming. I told Graves, "Get the room ready." The meeting took place in a private conference room at a high-end hotel downtown. It was neutral ground. Thorne sat at the head of the table. 2 large security guards stood by the door. On the table sat a black briefcase and a single document. Byron and Courtney arrived together. They were holding hands, presenting a united front, but I could see the tension in Byron's shoulders. He was sweating. Courtney was scanning the room, her eyes fixated on the briefcase. "Mr. Hart." "Mrs. Hart," Thorne said, gesturing to the chairs. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Let's get this over with," Byron said, trying to sound authoritative. Thorne pushed the document toward him. It was a single page. Affidavit of Responsibility and Liability Acceptance. It detailed the lack of oversight. It detailed the specific maintenance orders for Unit 404. It detailed that Byron Hart, as director, had full knowledge of the budget cuts that led to the brake failure. It was a confession disguised as a contract. Byron picked up the pen. His hand shook. He read the lines. "I, Byron Hart, accept full administrative liability." He hesitated. He looked at Thorne. "This stays internal, right? This is just for your insurance files." "Strictly internal," Thorne lied. "We just need to close the loop on the old company liabilities so Phoenix can move forward." Byron looked at Courtney. She nodded, her eyes wide with greed. She tapped the briefcase with a manicured fingernail. "Sign it," she mouthed. Byron took a deep breath. He pressed the pen to the paper. He signed his name, the same signature that was on the maintenance log, the same signature that had doomed me. "Thank you," Thorne said. He took the paper and slid it into a folder. He pushed the briefcase across the table. Courtney lunged for it. She snapped the latches open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were bundles of $100 bills. $2 million. It smelled of ink and freedom. Courtney let out a small squeal. She ran her hands over the money. Byron stared at it, a look of relief washing over his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had escaped the consequences of his actions. "Is it all there?" Byron asked. "Count it if you like," Thorne said. "But I assure you Phoenix Holdings honors its deals. We believe you," Courtney said, snapping the case shut. She grabbed the handle. "Let's go, Byron. We have a plane to catch." They stood up. Byron buttoned his jacket. He looked at Thorne. "Tell the new owner. Tell him I hope he chokes on the company." "I will convey the message," Thorne said impassively. They walked out of the room. I watched on the monitor as they headed for the elevator, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline. They didn't know that the money was real, but the serial numbers were recorded. They didn't know the briefcase contained a GPS tracker. And they certainly didn't know that the document Byron had just signed was already being faxed to the district attorney's office. I sat back in my chair. The trap was sprung. They had the bait. Now I just had to wait for them to throw the party. I turned to Graves. "They are going to throw a farewell party," I predicted. "Byron's ego won't let him leave town quietly. He needs to show everyone he came out on top." Graves nodded. "And that is where we will end him." I looked at the image of the empty conference room. The pen lay on the table where Byron had left it. It was the instrument of his destruction, and he had wielded it himself. "Enjoy the money, son," I whispered. "It is the severance package for your life." The mansion was vibrating with the bass of music I did not recognize. It was a celebration of excess, a final desperate scream of wealth from a man who had already lost everything. Byron had decided that if he was going to leave town, he was going to leave a legend. He had hired a catering company, a DJ, and an open bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. He had invited the business elite of the city, the social climbers, and most importantly, the press. He wanted the narrative to be his. He wanted the headline to read, "Young Tycoon Exits with Grace and Fortune, Not Bankrupt Son Flees in Shame." I watched from the back of the black SUV as we pulled up to the gate. The security guard, a man hired for the night who didn't know the property was already foreclosed, waved us through when he saw the hood ornament of the Rolls-Royce. We drove past the line of luxury cars parked on the grass. I saw the lights reflecting off the fountain. I saw the shadows of people dancing in the windows. It looked like a castle. It felt like a tomb. Byron stood on the terrace holding a microphone. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket, trying to channel a charisma he didn't possess. Courtney was beside him in a shimmering silver dress that looked like chainmail. She was gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles were white. I knew why. The tracker in the briefcase told us it was inside the master bedroom closet, but she probably wished she had it strapped to her chest. I turned to Graves. "Are you ready for the show?" I asked. Graves adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at the house with the cold appraisal of a man about to demolish a building. "I have been waiting 20 years to see you take your gloves off, Walter. I wouldn't miss this for the world." We stepped out of the car. The night air was warm, smelling of jasmine and expensive perfume. I buttoned my jacket. I felt the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just a party crash. This was an eviction notice served by fate. I walked up the stone steps. The doorman tried to stop us. "Sir, do you have an invitation?" he asked, stepping in front of me. I didn't stop. I didn't even look at him. "I own the pavement you are standing on," I said, my voice low and hard. The doorman hesitated, confused by the absolute authority in my tone. Graves stepped up beside me, slipping a $100 bill into the man's pocket. "Valet the car," Graves said, "and keep the engine running." We walked through the open double doors. The foyer was crowded. People were laughing, drinking, shouting over the music. The chandelier sparkled above, casting a fractured light on the scene. I stepped into the room. At first no one noticed. They saw just another two men in suits. But then a hush started to ripple through the crowd. It started near the door and spread outward like a wave. People stopped talking. People stopped drinking. They turned to look. They recognized Cornelius Graves first. He was a celebrity in these circles, a titan everyone feared. His presence alone was enough to stop a party. But then they looked at me. They knew Walter Hart, the trucker. They knew Walter Hart, the weary CEO in the rumpled suit who had pleaded guilty. They didn't know this man. They didn't know the man in the midnight blue bespoke suit with the clean-shaven jaw and the eyes of a predator, but they recognized the ghost. "Is that Walter?" someone whispered. I walked through the crowd. I didn't push. I didn't have to. The sea of people parted for me. They stepped back, giving me a wide berth, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from me. I walked with a steady, rhythmic pace, my eyes locked on the terrace doors. Byron was still speaking. He hadn't noticed the silence inside yet. "It is a bittersweet moment," he was saying into the microphone, his voice amplified across the lawn. Selling the family business was a hard decision, but it was the right one. The $2 million buyout allows Courtney and me to pursue new philanthropic ventures in Europe. We are leaving the past behind. He raised his glass for a toast. "The past has a way of catching up, Byron," I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the sudden silence of the house it carried all the way to the terrace. Byron froze. He lowered his glass. He squinted into the light coming from the living room. Courtney turned around, her face losing all its color. I stepped out onto the terrace. The guests outside fell silent too, following the gaze of the people inside. The music cut off abruptly as the DJ realized something was happening. Dad Byron stammered. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. He looked at his guests, trying to play it off. "Look, everyone, it is my father. He must have heard about the party." He stepped toward me, his smile tight and fake. He was trying to block me from the microphone. He was trying to intercept the disaster. "Wow. Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a hiss as he got close. "What are you doing here? You look different. Did you win a scratch-off ticket? You need to leave. You are embarrassing me." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the fear in his eyes. I didn't answer him. I walked past him. I took the microphone from his hand. He was too shocked to resist. I turned to the crowd. I saw the reporters in the back, their cameras raised, sensing the story of the year. I saw the business rivals who had laughed at my downfall. I saw Courtney trembling by the railing. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and steady. "Thank you for coming." Byron tried to grab my arm. "Dad, give me that. You are drunk." Graves stepped forward. He placed a hand on Byron's chest. It looked gentle, but I knew Byron couldn't move. "Stay there, son," Graves said. "Listen to your father." I looked back at the crowd. "My son tells you he sold the company," I said. "He tells you he is leaving for Europe with a fortune. He tells you this is a celebration of new beginnings." I paused. I let the tension build until it was suffocating. "He is lying." A gasp went through the crowd. Cameras flashed blinding white bursts in the night. "Byron isn't leaving because he is successful," I continued. "He is leaving because he is fleeing. He didn't sell the company, he forfeited it, and he didn't buy this champagne. I did." "Dad, stop," Byron shouted. He tried to push past Graves, but Graves didn't budge. You see, I went on, my voice rising, gaining power. "My son told me a week ago that there was no room for me in this house. He told me to find somewhere else to live. He threw me out into the rain with $200. The crowd murmured. They looked at Byron with shock. This was the dirty laundry they loved to see aired. So I took his advice, I said. I found somewhere else. I found a partner. And I found a new investment. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. I held it up. "This house," I said, waving the paper. "This house that my son is standing in. This house where he is drinking my liquor and lying to your faces. It was in foreclosure as of this morning. The bank sold the debt." I turned to Byron. I looked him dead in the eye. "They sold it to a company called Phoenix Holdings." Byron blinked. He looked confused. "So what?" he said. "I will pay them. I have the money. I have the $2 million. The money you signed a confession to get," I asked. Byron went white. "You signed an affidavit admitting to negligence," I said. "You admitted to cutting the maintenance budget. You admitted to the safety violations. You traded your freedom for that briefcase upstairs." I turned back to the crowd. "And Phoenix Holdings," I said, my voice thundering now. "Phoenix Holdings is not some anonymous corporation. Phoenix Holdings is the bird that rises from the ashes." I pointed a finger at my chest. "I am Phoenix Holdings." The glass slipped from Byron's hand. It hit the stone patio and shattered. Champagne splattered across his polished shoes. The sound was the punctuation mark on his life. "I bought your debt, Byron," I said. "I bought your loans. I bought your car notes. I own this house. I own the shirt on your back, and I am evicting you. Courtney screamed. It was a primal sound of rage and defeat. "You can't do this," she yelled, lunging at me. "We have the money. We have cash. You have marked bills," I said coldly. "And you have a signed confession that is currently sitting on the desk of the district attorney." The crowd erupted. It was chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Guests were backing away, not wanting to be associated with the fallout. "Security," I called out. The private security team I had hired, men who had been waiting in the perimeter, stepped onto the terrace. They weren't there to protect the party. They were there to end it. "Clear the house," I ordered. "Everyone out. Now." I looked at Byron. He was staring at the shattered glass on the floor. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like a boy who had just realized the monster under the bed was real, and it was his father. "Happy housewarming, son," I whispered. "Now get off my property." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the feedback screeching like a dying siren. I walked past him toward the interior of the house that was finally truly mine. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I would see. A ruin. And I had been the wrecking ball. I did not come here just to ruin a party. I came here to ruin a life, and the screen behind me was the guillotine blade waiting to drop. The crowd was still murmuring, a sea of confused faces illuminated by the fairy lights strung through the trees. They were looking at me, the ghost who had just declared ownership of the castle. They were looking at Byron, the prince who had just been dethroned. But they were not looking at the truth yet. "Look at the screen," I commanded. My voice did not need to be loud to be obeyed. It carried the weight of absolute authority. I signaled the technician Graves had planted in the DJ booth. The music, which had been a low thrum of anxiety, cut out completely. The massive projection screen that Byron had set up to show a montage of his charitable works flickered. The image of Byron shaking hands with a senator disappeared. It was replaced by static, then a clear, high-definition video feed. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the terrace. The video showed a hotel room. It was the Ritz-Carlton. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 weeks ago. Sitting on the plush velvet sofa were two people the crowd knew very well. Courtney Hart and Simon Fletcher. They were not discussing legal strategy. They were entangled in each other, a mess of limbs and laughter. Simon was pouring champagne. Courtney was wearing a robe that was open. The audio boomed across the lawn, crisp and undeniable. "He is so pathetic," Simon's voice sneered from the speakers. "He actually thinks he is running the company. I have to hold his hand just to sign a check." Courtney laughed on the screen. It was a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the walls of the mansion. "I know," she said. "He is like a puppy, a stupid, loyal puppy. But once the auction money clears, we put him down. We take the cash to the Caymans and I file the papers. I cannot wait to be rid of that last name. I hate the smell of diesel on him." I watched Byron. He was staring at the screen, his mouth agape. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the heat. He looked at the screen, then he slowly turned his head to look at Courtney standing beside him. She was frozen. Her hand was covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't looking at Byron. She was looking at the guests, watching her social standing evaporate in real time. But I wasn't done. The video cut. The image changed. Now the screen showed a document. It was blown up so everyone could see the fine print. It was the maintenance log for Unit 404, the truck that had crashed, the truck that had killed a man. The red laser pointer of the projector traced the line of text. Emergency brake system override, authorization code BH77. And there at the bottom, magnified 10 times, was the signature, Byron Hart. Then a second image appeared next to it. It was the photo of the cut brake line, the clean diagonal snip, the evidence of murder. The audio played again. It was a phone call this time. Byron's voice, shaky, terrified. "Simon, I did it. I cut the line. But the driver, he wasn't supposed to be on that route. What do I do?" And Simon's voice, calm and soothing. "You do nothing, Byron. We blame the maintenance crew. We blame your father's lack of oversight. We bury it." The silence on the terrace was absolute. It was the silence of a crowd witnessing an execution. The reporters were no longer taking photos. They were recording their faces grim. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a crime scene. Byron stood there, stripped naked, in front of the city he wanted to rule. He had been exposed not just as a failure, but as a cuckold, a thief, and a killer. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading, begging me to stop it, to turn it off, to save him one last time. I looked back at him. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I let the weight of his sins crush him. "You wanted to be the man of the house," I said softly. "Now you are." The explosion happened in an instant. The shock that had paralyzed Byron shattered, replaced by a blind, animalistic rage. He let out a roar that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a wounded beast cornered in a trap. He didn't come for me. He turned on the person closest to him. He turned on Courtney. You knew he screamed. You knew everything. He lunged at her. His hands, usually so manicured and soft, curled into claws. He grabbed the fabric of her expensive silver dress and ripped. The sound of tearing silk was loud in the quiet night. Courtney shrieked, stumbling back in her high heels. She fell onto the stone patio, scrambling backwards like a crab kicking at him. "Get away from me," she yelled. "You loser. You incompetent loser." Byron dove onto her. He wasn't hitting her. He was shaking her, shaking the truth out of her. "You laughed at me," he sobbed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You laughed at me with him. I gave you everything. I sold my father for you." Simon Fletcher, who had been standing near the buffet table trying to look invisible, decided this was his moment to exit. He saw Byron on the ground. He saw the crowd turning toward him with hostility. He dropped his drink and bolted. He ran toward the side gate, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the wet grass. He was fast fueled by the adrenaline of a coward who knows the game is up. He almost made it. He reached the iron gate and reached for the latch. But Cornelius Graves was faster, or perhaps he had just anticipated the move. Graves stepped out from the shadows of the hedges. He didn't run. He just occupied the space. He raised his cane, a heavy piece of ebony wood with a silver handle, and slammed it against the gate, blocking the latch. "Going somewhere?" Counselor Graves asked. His voice was calm, amused even. "The party is just getting started." Simon skidded to a halt. He looked at Graves, then at the wall, looking for a way to climb. "Move out of my way, old man," he hissed. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Graves said. "You are the man who is going to make me very famous for catching you." Simon tried to push past him. Graves didn't budge. He simply extended his arm, his hand clamping onto Simon's shoulder with a grip that had crushed competitors for decades. He shoved Simon back. Simon stumbled and fell into a rosebush, tearing his suit and scratching his face. He scrambled up, looking wild, trapped between the billionaire and the mob. Back on the terrace, the chaos had escalated. Guests were screaming. Two of the waiters had stepped in to pull Byron off Courtney. They dragged him back, holding him by the arms as he kicked and spat. "She is a snake!" Byron screamed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and the champagne. She planned it all. It was her idea. Courtney stood up. Her dress was ruined. Her hair was a mess. She pointed a shaking finger at him. "You are the murderer," she shrieked. "I just spent the money. You cut the brakes. You killed that driver. Don't you dare pin that on me." It was a beautiful implosion. They were tearing each other apart, confessing their crimes at the top of their lungs for the world to hear. I watched them. I felt a deep, hollowing sadness. This was my family. This was the legacy I had built. A son who was a killer. A daughter-in-law who was a parasite. The sound of sirens cut through the screaming. It started as a low wail in the distance, then grew louder, a cacophony of justice approaching at high speed. Blue and red lights began to flash against the trees, bouncing off the white columns of the mansion. The police were here. I had made the call 10 minutes ago, right before I took the microphone, but I hadn't called 911. I had called Sheriff Miller. Miller walked through the front gate. He was a big man, broad as a barn door, wearing his uniform with the grim dignity of a man who has seen too much evil. He had been my friend for 30 years. We had fished together. We had mourned our wives together. He knew Byron since he was in diapers. He walked onto the terrace, followed by 4 deputies. The crowd parted for him instantly. He looked at the scene. He looked at Courtney shivering in her torn dress. He looked at Simon bleeding near the rose bushes. He looked at Byron held back by the waiters. Then he looked at me. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the pain this was causing me and the necessity of it. "Byron Hart Miller said." His voice was heavy. Byron stopped struggling. He looked at the sheriff. "Uncle Jim," he whispered, using the name he had called him as a child. "Please, they are lying." Sheriff Miller didn't smile. He didn't soften. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted in the harsh light of the video screen that was still playing the loop of Byron's confession. "You are under arrest," son Miller said. "For what?" Byron asked, his voice trembling. Miller recited the list. It was long. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, grand larceny, assault. Byron slumped. The fight went out of him. He let the waiters go. He turned around slowly, putting his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Miller gestured to his deputies. "Grab the girl!" And the lawyer. 2 deputies moved toward Courtney. She tried to run, tried to dart back into the house, but they caught her easily. She screamed as the cuffs went on. "I am a victim," she yelled. I am the victim here." Other deputies went for Simon. He didn't run anymore. He just hung his head, defeated by the old man with the cane. I watched as they were marched across the terrace. My son, my daughter-in-law, my lawyer. They were paraded past the guests they had tried to impress. They were walked past the cameras. Byron looked at me as he passed. He had tears in his eyes. "Dad," he mouthed, "help me." I stood there in my midnight blue suit. I felt the knife in my pocket. I felt the deed to the house in my hand. I looked at the boy. I had raised the boy I had protected from the rain his whole life. I didn't step forward. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I didn't call a lawyer. I just watched. "You made your bed, son," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me over the sirens. "Now you have to sleep in it." The police cars drove away, their lights fading into the night. The party was over. The guests began to scatter, fleeing the scene of the disaster. I was left standing on the terrace of my new house. The screen was still playing the video of the cut brake line. I signaled the technician to cut it. The darkness returned. Graves walked up to me. He handed me a glass of whiskey. "It is done," he said. I took the glass. I took a long drink. It burned, going down. "It is done," I agreed. But as I looked out over the empty lawn, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. I had destroyed the enemy. But the enemy was my own blood, and now I had to live with the ghosts. The visiting room of the county jail smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. It was a smell I knew well from my early days hauling cargo out of detention centers, but today it smelled like victory. I sat on the metal stool, my back straight, my hands folded on the cold stainless steel ledge. I was wearing my charcoal suit. I looked like the CEO I was. On the other side of the thick, scratched plexiglass sat a man in a bright orange jumpsuit. He looked like a stranger. Byron had lost 15 pounds in a month. His hair, usually styled with expensive gels, was greasy and matted against his skull. His skin was sallow, the color of old parchment. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the guard standing by the door. He looked at the cuffs chaining his wrists to the table. When he finally raised his eyes to meet mine, I didn't see the arrogance that had been there at the mansion. I didn't see the pride. I saw a terrified child. He picked up the phone receiver. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. I picked up mine. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was a cracked, broken thing. "Dad, you came. I knew you would come. You have to get me out of here." I looked at him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched him unravel. "It is a nightmare in here," Byron continued, the words tumbling out of him in a rush of panic. "The food, the noise. I can't sleep. There are gangs, Dad. They know who I am. They know I have money. Or they think I do. They threatened me in the showers. You have to post bail. The judge set it at $5 million. You have that kind of money now. I know you do." He paused, waiting for me to pull out my checkbook, waiting for the rescue that had always come. When I didn't move, his face crumpled. He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "It wasn't my fault," he sobbed. "It was Courtney. She made me do it. She is a witch, Dad. She manipulated me. She told me you were too old to run the company. She told me we deserved the money. I tried to stop her. I swear. I didn't want to cut the brake lines. She pushed me. She said if I didn't do it, she would leave me. I did it for love, Dad. I did it because I was weak. He was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs that shook his entire frame. He wiped his nose on his sleeve. "She played us both," he said. "She is the villain here. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You can't leave me in here with these animals. I am not like them. I am a heart." I listened to him blame the woman he had conspired with. I listened to him use our name, the name I had built as a get-out-of-jail-free card. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He wasn't sorry he killed a driver. He wasn't sorry he tried to destroy me. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry the bed he made was hard and cold. "You are right," I said into the receiver. My voice was calm, flat. "You are a heart. And that is the tragedy." Byron blinked, hope flickering in his eyes. "So you will help me. You will talk to the lawyers. We can pin it all on Courtney." She signed the receipt for the watch. "We can say she forged my signature on the maintenance logs." He was still scheming. Even in chains, he was looking for the angle. He was looking for the person to push in front of the bus. "I am not going to talk to the lawyers, Byron," I said. "And I am not going to post bail." Byron's face fell. "What? Why? You have the money. You stole my house. You stole my company. You owe me this. I stole nothing," I said, my voice hardening. "I reclaimed what was mine. And I owe you nothing but the truth." I leaned in closer to the glass. "Do you know what I was doing when I was your age, Byron?" Byron shook his head, confused by the shift in conversation. "Dad, please. I don't want a history lesson." "I was scrubbing floors," I said. "I was 35 years old. I had one truck. It broke down every 100 miles. I couldn't afford a mechanic, so I fixed it myself in the rain and the snow on the side of the highway with cars flying past me at 80 miles an hour. I slept in the cab. I ate beans out of a can. I washed my clothes in gas station sinks." Byron rolled his eyes. He had heard this before, but he had never really listened. "I did that for 10 years, I continued. I swallowed my pride every single day. I let men insult me. I let banks laugh at me. I took the scraps they threw on the floor and I built a ladder out of them. And do you know why I did it?" Byron stayed silent. "I did it so you wouldn't have to," I said. "I looked at your hands when you were a baby. They were so soft. I swore to myself that those hands would never have to touch engine grease. I swore you would never have to beg a man for a job. I wanted to give you the world on a silver platter." I paused. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for tears. "And I succeeded," I said. "I gave you the best schools. I gave you the executive job. I gave you the house. I shielded you from every storm. I held the umbrella so you never felt a drop of rain." I looked at him, huddled in his orange suit. "But that was my mistake," I said softly. "I protected you from the struggle. I protected you from the very thing that makes a man a man. I thought I was raising a prince, but I was raising a parasite." "Dad, stop." Byron whimpered. "I raised a wolf, Byron," I said. "I brought a wolf into my house and I fed it from my own plate. But I forgot to teach it how to hunt. I forgot to teach it that meat doesn't just appear. It has to be earned. So when the wolf got hungry and it didn't know how to hunt, it turned on the only thing it knew. It turned on the hand that fed it. It turned on me. You are the wolf's son. You bit me because it was easier than biting the world. You tried to kill me because you were too weak to build your own kingdom. You wanted mine." "I didn't want to kill you," Byron protested weakly. "I just wanted you to retire. You cut the brake lines," I snapped. "That is murder. That is the act of a coward who strikes from the shadows. A man faces his enemy. A man says, 'I want your chair,' and fights for it. A coward sabotages the machine and blames the mechanic." I stood up. The metal stool scraped against the floor. The sound echoed in the small room. Byron stood up too, panic seizing him again. "Where are you going? You can't leave." I looked at him through the glass. He looked like a ghost of the son I wanted him to be. "I am leaving, Byron," I said. "I have a company to run. I have a legacy to rebuild, a legacy you tried to burn down." "Dad, please!" Byron screamed, slamming his hand against the glass. The guard stepped forward, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I am not your father anymore," I said. "The father you knew died in the rain outside your door. I am just the man who survived you." Byron was crying again, snot running down his face. "You can't leave me here. I will die in here. I am not strong enough." "Then learn," I said. "Prison is your school now, Byron. It is the first place in your life where your last name doesn't matter. It is the first place where my money can't save you. You want to be a man, then survive. Stand on your own 2 feet. Face the consequences of your actions without hiding behind a woman or a lawyer or your father. I hung up the phone. No, Byron screamed. He was shouting through the glass now, his voice muffled and frantic. Don't do this. I am sorry, I will sign anything. Just get me out. I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face. Not the face of the executive, not the face of the killer, but the face of the boy who had lost his way because I had paved the road too smoothly. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the heavy steel door. I heard him screaming my name. Walter, Walter. He didn't call me Dad anymore. He knew he had lost that right. The guard buzzed the door open. I stepped out into the hallway. The door clanged shut behind me, cutting off the screams. The silence of the corridor was heavy, but it was clean. I walked down the long hallway, my footsteps steady. I felt lighter. The burden of my son, the burden of his weakness was gone. I had carried him for 35 years. Today I put him down. I walked out of the jail and into the bright sunlight. Cornelius Graves was waiting by the car. He looked at me. He didn't ask what happened. He saw it in my eyes. It is done, I said. Graves nodded. He opened the car door. Let's go home, Walter, he said. I got in the car. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the prison. I looked forward. I looked at the city skyline. I looked at the future. It was going to be hard work rebuilding everything from the ashes. But I wasn't afraid of hard work. I was Walter Hart, and I was just getting started. The elevator doors to the executive suite of Hart Logistics slid open with a chime that sounded like a bell tolling for the start of a new shift. I walked onto the floor. It was quiet. The open plan office, usually buzzing with the noise of dispatchers and logistics coordinators, was silent. Byron had fired half the staff to cut costs, and the other half had quit out of disgust. The air smelled of stale coffee and neglect. I didn't stop to look at the empty desks. I walked straight to the CEO's office. The door was open. Inside the desk was cluttered with Byron's debris. Fancy paperweights, unopened mail, a half-empty bottle of scotch. It looked like a frat house, not a command center. I picked up the bottle of scotch. It was expensive. I poured it into the trash can. Then I picked up the nameplate. Byron Hart, CEO. I dropped it in the trash on top of the liquor. I pressed the intercom button on the desk phone. Security, I said. Yes, Mr. Hart. The voice came back. It was Johnson, the head of security. He had been with me for 15 years. Byron had demoted him to the night shift, but I had brought him back this morning. Send in the cleaning crew, I ordered. I want this office stripped. I want the paint changed. I want the carpet replaced. I want every trace of the last 6 months erased by tomorrow morning. Yes, Sir, Johnson said. And sir, welcome back. I didn't smile. There was no time for smiling. I had a company to resurrect. I spent the next week living in that office. I worked 18-hour days. I called every vendor Byron had stiffened. I called every client he had lost. I didn't offer excuses. I offered guarantees. I put the full weight of Phoenix Holdings behind every promise. But the most important calls were to the people. I pulled the personnel files of everyone Byron had let go. The mechanics who knew how to fix a transmission with a wrench and a prayer. The drivers who had perfect safety records until Byron pushed them to drive overtime without pay. The dispatchers who knew the city map better than a GPS. I called them personally. This is Walter Hart, I would say. I am back at the desk. I need you. Some were angry, some were skeptical, but they all remembered who signed their paychecks for 20 years. They remembered the Christmas bonuses. They remembered that I knew their kids' names. They came back. Slowly at first, then in a flood. They walked through the doors wearing their old uniforms, looking wary. But when they saw me standing on the floor, sleeves rolled up, arguing with a supplier on the phone, they knew the king was back. And this time, the kingdom was going to be ironclad. I didn't just rebuild, I fortified. I implemented new oversight protocols. I fired the sycophants Byron had hired. I created a new board of directors comprised of people who knew the difference between a balance sheet and a scam. I turned Hart Logistics into a machine that was leaner, meaner, and more profitable than it had ever been. I wasn't doing it for the money anymore. I was doing it to prove a point. I was doing it to show the world and my son sitting in a jail cell that you cannot kill a man who built himself from the ground up. You can only make him start over. And when he starts over, he builds higher walls. 6 months later, the company was posting record profits. The debt was serviced. The reputation was restored. But as I sat in my office looking at the black ink on the ledger, I felt a hollowness. The money was piling up again. Millions of dollars. And I had no one to leave it to. My son was gone. My wife was dead. The empire was secure, but it was empty. I thought about the warehouse I had bought back, the one I turned into a shelter. I visited it every Sunday. I saw the faces of the people there, men and women who had been discarded, people who had worked hard and lost everything. I realized I didn't need an heir of my blood. I needed heirs of my spirit. I called Graves. "I want to start a foundation," I said. Graves laughed on the other end of the line. "You are going soft, Walter." "No," I said. "I am going strategic. I have all this capital. If I die, the state takes it. Or worse, Byron gets out in 20 years and fights for it. I want to put it somewhere he can never touch it." "What do you have in mind?" Graves asked. "The Hart Foundation," I said. "A venture capital fund. But not for Silicon Valley kids. For kids like I was. Kids from the South Side. Kids with dirt under their fingernails and fire in their bellies. I want to fund young black entrepreneurs who want to build real businesses. Logistics, construction, manufacturing, the backbone of this country." Graves was silent for a moment. "That is a lot of risk, Walter." "I built a fortune on risk," I replied. I launched the foundation a month later. The criteria were strict. I didn't want Ivy League degrees. I didn't want polished pitch decks. I wanted character. I wanted grit. I personally interviewed every finalist. One afternoon, a young man named Marcus walked into my office. He was 24 years old. He was wearing a suit that was clearly bought at a thrift store, but it was pressed sharp. He wanted to start a plumbing company. He had a business plan written in a spiral notebook. "Why should I give you $100,000, Marcus?" I asked. Marcus looked me in the eye. He didn't blink. "Because I am tired of being poor, sir, and I am the best plumber in my neighborhood. I just need a van and tools. I don't need a handout. I need a start." I looked at him. I saw the hunger. I saw the pride. I saw the young Walter Hart standing in the rain 40 years ago. "I am not going to give you $100,000, I said. Marcus's face fell. He started to pack up his notebook. "I am going to give you $200,000, I said, "but I own 10%. And if you lie to me, if you cheat your customers, if you cut corners, I will crush you. Do we have a deal?" Marcus stopped. He looked at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Deal," he said. I shook his hand. It was rough. It was calloused. It was the hand of a man. Over the next year, I funded 50 companies, 50 young men and women who became my children in a way Byron never was. I taught them how to read a contract. I taught them how to negotiate. I taught them that your word is your bond. They called me Mr. Hart. They invited me to their grand openings. They sent me Christmas cards that weren't just obligations. They were my legacy. A legacy that wasn't built on DNA, but on sweat and honor. I visited Byron once more in prison. I didn't go into the visiting room. I just watched him from the observation deck while he was in the yard. He was sitting alone on a bench. He looked older. He looked defeated. He had made his choices. I had made mine. I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back. I had 50 other children to take care of. On the 1-year anniversary of the night I was kicked out, I drove the Rolls-Royce up the driveway of my old house. I had bought it back from Phoenix Holdings. I had moved back in. It was evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The air was cool, but it wasn't raining. I walked up the stone steps. I stood on the porch where Byron had handed me the $200. I looked at the spot where the money had fallen in the mud. There was nothing there now but clean stone. I unlocked the heavy mahogany door and walked inside. The house was quiet. I had removed all of Courtney's furniture. I had removed the gaudy chandeliers. I had filled it with my things again. My books, my leather chairs, the smell of my pipe tobacco. It was a big house for one man. Some might say it was lonely. But as I walked through the rooms, I didn't feel lonely. I felt victorious. I walked out to the back terrace. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine. I sat in my favorite chair and looked out over the manicured lawn. The city lights were twinkling in the distance. My trucks were out there on the highways moving the world. My protégés were out there building their dreams. I was 72 years old. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I had been stripped naked and thrown into the storm, and I had come back wearing armor. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like earth and history. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened a new text message. I scrolled to the contact named Cornelius Graves. I typed a message. I am sitting on my porch, Neil. The wine is good. The house is quiet. I paused. I looked at the horizon. You were right. The victory is sweet. But don't think I am retiring. I just saw a competitor trying to muscle in on the west side routes. I think I might buy him out tomorrow. I hit send. A moment later, the phone buzzed. I expected nothing less. Walter, the game never ends. I smiled. I put the phone down. No, the game never ends. And as long as I had breath in my lungs, I was going to win. I raised my glass to the empty yard. Here is to the rain, I whispered. It washes away the weak. I drank the wine. I watched the sun disappear. And for the first time in a long time, Walter Hart was at peace. The most painful truth I discovered is that unconditional love should never mean unconditional tolerance. I spent my life shielding my son from the rain only to realize I was robbing him of the strength to weather the storm. By protecting him from every struggle, I didn't raise a prince. I raised a predator who turned on me the moment he got hungry. True family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and shared values. You can rebuild your empire and your fortune, but you must never sacrifice your dignity. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let the people who refuse to grow up finally fall. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace?